Hello and a very warm welcome to this special WPP web seminar all about the 2017 Best Countries Study. My name's David Roth from WPP and it's my pleasure to guide you through today's web seminar. And I'm going to be joined by a number of guests as we get under the skin to understand exactly what the study covers, some of the key findings and how you all can use it for understanding both brands and countries better for your clients and also for new business. Well, who better to have as our first guest in this special web seminar than the person who had the concept, the thought, 3 years ago now, of doing the best studies. David Sable, the Chief Executive of Y&R. David, thanks very much indeed for joining us.
David, I'm happy to be here. I wish it was my idea. It's not. It's been it takes a country to do a country. And really we had a great team who put this together, including former Israeli ambassador who helped us very much in the very beginning put this together and put the concept together. So,
I mean, I suppose it's slightly disingenuous to say, and maybe even you had the idea. I mean, nation branding goes back to, well, since the birth of nations. I mean, I suppose.
Oh my God!
You talk about the Israeli ambassador. The children of Israel, the tabernacles. That was probably the ultimate branding device to start with. And then, of course, the Roman Empire. I mean,
absolutely.
Well, the fear of the empire of soldiers, on their way to your country from Rome, sent the fear of God into people before they'd even
without a
seen anybody.
Without
so
doubt.
That was
as soon as you saw that SPQR, Senatus Populesque Romanus, you knew exactly what it meant because it was a brand. And in fact, the great thing about living in our time is that there's actual video of all that. So we have the video of the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea, and we also have video of, and it's great, you can find it on HBO, it's called Rome. And you can watch, you can see. But the truth of the matter is that when you did see that SPQR, when you saw the pyramids of ancient Egypt, in fact, when you saw the Crusaders' crosses, all of those things brought into people's minds fears, hopes, possibilities, opportunities. That's what a brand does. So that kind of branding has always been around.
So I suppose the trick, the cleverness, I think, of this study is taking, I suppose, the skills that you've got here at Y&R in terms of BAV and applying those not just to brands now, but also to countries. Expand a little bit about that.
Without doubt. So I think that when you look at it, so BAV goes back some 28 years almost, and I was just a young pup, as they say at Y&R, when the study was first created. And what made the study interesting back in the day was that the way brands had been studied in those days, and by the way, it's studied by many companies still today, which sort of amazes me, but they'd put 3 different types of cola in front of you and say, which do you like better? And you'd pick the Coke or the Pepsi or whatever, and they'd say, 10 people out of 15 picked the Coke, ergo that's the best brand. I think the way we came at it was with data. So we created a database. The database was based on attributes. So every brand had attributes that were asked about it, but they were the same attributes asked about everything. And by the way, even then we put countries in. We put countries and we put individuals in. We sort of did it because we weren't sure, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But when we look at it, we had 72 different brand metrics, 48 image and personality dimensions. All of a sudden, you create this database of assets that allows you to say, okay, what is this brand made of? And it tells you all those attributes. Now take the brand out, and I have all that data. And I say, okay, what else looks like this from a data point of view? I have another however many brands. Some of them might not be in the same category. Many of them probably aren't in the same category. So all of a sudden I'm able to look cross-category. I'm able to look globally because this is a global study. I'm able to look back over 28 years of data and millions of people who've been asked questions. So in a sense, this is the ultimate database of brand information, but it is all based on data.
And one of the, I suppose, the interesting things that I know that you've seen from that history of data at BAV is sort of the blurring of the boundaries now.
Oh my God, yes.
When you started, I suppose, nations, countries were highly respected, and now what we're seeing is a blurring in terms of brands being more respected than nations, and maybe even brands or personality brands being more respected than certainly politicians and leaders of
Without
of
doubt,
countries.
when we look today at the UK, you can't look at the UK without looking at Richard Branson. You can't look at Richard Branson without looking at Virgin. So all of a sudden, and you can't look at either of those two without looking at the brand of the UK. Now the truth is, nobody would have done that a bunch of years ago. You would have said, just looked at Virgin. Now we look at all three, and we try to understand what's the confluence of power, what's the confluence of image, what's the confluence of opportunity between understanding how Richard Branson as a leader plays into the UK plays into him, and then into his own brand.
But is this the fundamental reframing of trust in a sense? Because we used to trust, our kings and our queens, but certainly from a British perspective, we used to trust our politicians. Trust is eroding. Is it just being transferred somewhere else, or is
I think it's
far more
eroding in
fundamental?
general. I think to your point, I think it is a fundamental issue. I think that there's a fundamental erosion of trust against almost every brand, the asset you can imagine in the world. So whether you're talking about countries, whether you're talking about people, whether you're talking about services, things, manufactured goods, there is definitely an erosion of trust. That there's no question. And I think that one of the things that we talk to our clients about, be they countries, people, or things, is try to understand that notion of trust. What drives the trust? What drives the lack of trust? And then how can they better understand by perhaps combining with other things where there is trust involved, or there is more trust, and be able to move up that ladder.
So I suppose the premise of the country study is also the fact that there is, you have a country brand lever to pull as much as you have an intrinsic brand lever or an intrinsic personality lever.
Without a doubt. And this, by the way, is new. This is something we only realized in the past couple of years. Now, it sort of is a duh when you think about it, but it is a huge opportunity for us. So, we were talking before, David, about the BrandZ study and the best brands in country. So now imagine that you take best brand in a country, and then you take the country branding, and you look at the confluence. And today, how can you talk about China, or how can you talk about Lenovo without talking about China? You can't talk about something, you can't talk about Vuitton without talking about France.
The US election, I know you've played around with some of the data in the US election. I can't let you go in the year of Trump without asking you a couple of questions in terms of that, in terms of brands and about brand strength, brand structure as well.
So back at the beginning of the election process, so this is still while the primaries were going on, we put in everybody. We threw all the names in. And we said, all right, let's look at this, because we had done it before. The truth of the matter is, our big aha on this came when Romney was running for president of the United States. And one of the big financial houses that we did business with, that was buying BAV data from us, looking at mergers and acquisitions, had put a lot of money behind Romney. And we didn't have much on Romney because we had just started, but we had a lot on religion. And because we knew how Americans looked at each other's religions, when we looked at attitudes towards Mormons, it became pretty clear to us. And again, it's not about hatred, and it's not about racism, and it's not about bias. It's just about attitudes towards how do they feel, how do they react, is there an emotional connection? We realized that he was in deeper trouble than anybody had thought, and that this financial house was putting a lot of money behind him was wrong. And when we told them, they laughed at us. After the election, they didn't laugh. And so when we looked at the election this time, we went back and we said, all right, let's start from the beginning. And it was very clear to us from day one that Trump as a brand was very powerful. Now, why was he powerful? Because he was fresh and new. And when you start to look at the word clouds around the attributes that he had were different than Hillary's. Hillary's attributes were very rooted in the way we aggregate all politicians. So if we take the total aggregation of all politicians we have in BAV and say, what are the key characteristics? She correlated at over 80%. He correlated at less than 70%. So he was seen as a non-politician right away and much more independent. So when you looked at the brand data, and you can see it, it's amazing. I mean, his brand was way up here in the power grid. She was kind of down here in this sort of, yes, esteem, knowledge, we know a lot about her, she still has esteem, but not fresh and new, not differentiated, not relevant.
And the rest, as they say.
And the rest is history. Now, the truth is,
history.
to be fair, we didn't predict he was going to win, but we did predict that he was going to do a lot. Now, by the end, we were pretty sure he was going to win, but we went, in fact, to major news outlets that were supporting Hillary, as well as to our own people, to say, you guys got a problem. Pay attention. This brand data is real. And we were kind of told to stay in our box. We said, okay, this is our box, guys. This is brand. Like, what don't you get? And there you are.
You're also seeing in the study now a close tie, I suppose, between countries and brands that those countries originate from.
Without a doubt. And as I started to say before, you can't separate China and Lenovo. Can't separate Chanel and France. American Express and the United States. These things are sort of, they're intrinsically connected in ways that you can't.
And they have advantages and disadvantages, clearly. I mean,
oh, without doubt. But look at Samsung and Korea. You know, you'd have to argue who did more for whose brand. I mean, fact is, I would argue that the Samsungs and the LGs of the world did a lot more for the country than the country did for them. Certainly, as they became powerful, they pulled the country with them.
I suppose in the same way that in the 1950s and the 1960s, American brands did a fantastic job for Americana around the world. Defining what Americana was around the world.
Without doubt, and still today, by the way. I mean, you know, I'm always reminded. I was thinking about today because I was thinking about the French election, and what do we learn from the French election? Again, if you go into the BAV data, and everybody's welcome to go in because you can actually play with it at U.S. News and World Report, and you look at the data on France, the results of the election aren't surprising at all. But what I was reminded of was sitting in a conference room some 30 years ago. I was working on a global brand. It was Colgate, and I was responsible for all of the work outside the United States. And I used to schlep with me this big duffel bag filled with 3/4-inch pneumatic tapes, for those of you who remember. And I would show work in different countries and say, hey, take a look at this work. You should think about running it. So I remember the first time I came to the office in Paris, and I was really excited because I had done business in Paris before, but never in our office. And I was in this office, this great conference room, and I'm showing the work. And of course, what do I hear? This will not work in France, please. And all of a sudden, like the dime dropped on me, and I'm looking around, and remember when this was, some 30 years ago, everybody was wearing Levi's. They all had Timberland boots. This is not a joke. Ray-Ban sunglasses were there, and everybody had a Parker pen. I'm thinking, okay, what am I missing here? But the truth is that they had assimilated, those are very American brands, but their view of it was different. So they were able to take that Americana and make it their own. But that's kind of the world we live in. So even back then, people were, it's sort of that melding of culture was very, very important. But you could say those brands are very, very associated with the U.S.
So given, I suppose, that context, what are the 4 key things that this year's study set out to prove?
So what we set out to prove, I think the first is just the notion of how countries are perceived as brands. Like, what does that mean? We know if I tell you American Express, or if I say Colgate or Coca-Cola, intrinsically you understand, but what does it mean when I talk about a country? Now, the truth is, I don't think it's actually quite that difficult, because if I would ask you what is country A, B, C, or D mean, much like the SPQR that we were talking about before, it's very clear. But I think we wanted to be able to quantify this for the first time. Qualifying it's always been easy. No one's ever been able to quantify it. So now we have the actual data. I think the second thing is, and this is where we start to get into the ability to take the data, the absolute data, and turn it into creative insight. What does it mean? What does the ideal nation look like? How do you create a set of metrics that tells you that one country is different than another, other than what you might think? And what are those? How do I measure that in ways that I can measure over time and that become systematic? I think the third thing was, what are the perceptions that shape the country's social economic, political future. Like, what are those things? So if I look at it, how can I predict out because of those perceptions? And then finally, what can leaders learn from each other? And I think when you put those are sort of like the 4 big buckets of things that we look at, and when you think about it, it's pretty powerful.
And to do that, you put an interesting constellation of skills and resources behind it.
We did. We were very lucky. I was introduced to Mort Zuckerberg of U.S. News and World Report. Now, U.S. News and World Report has been famous for their ranking issues. Now, what's most fascinating about that, by the way, they're in the United States, and in fact abroad as well, because people are interested in U.S. universities. Their university ranking, college and universities, is one of the most popular pieces of content on the web and in print. It's unbelievable. And so they've gotten famous for their rankings, and then it's not just the rankings, but then they create a ton of content around those rankings. What do they mean? And what's behind it? And how does it? So I was introduced to Mort. Mort introduced me to Bill Holliber, who's the publisher. And basically what he did is he said to Bill, okay, go make a deal with him. And I swear to you, it was the fastest deal. Bill, I was walking up the street from the restaurant I had met Mort in, and I called Bill. He said, yeah, David, I'd never met him before. I was expecting your call. I said, yeah, Mort said we should do this. He said, great. And we talked 5 minutes. We put the outline of the deal together, and the rest is history. And we've been partners ever since. So U.S. News and World Report for 2 reasons. One, because they had the media distribution, and it's been very powerful for them and for us. And because they had the ability to create incredible content around this.
And all that content's available for everybody to take a look at.
Everybody.
We'll give you the details of how you can get onto the site.
Oh my God, just go to usnewsandworldreport.com, best countries, and you can actually play with the data. You can read the content. There's new content literally posted every day. It's unbelievable. The third partner was Wharton. Now, Wharton was a really important partner for us for a lot of reasons. One is because Wharton, David Ripstein and the whole Wharton School, has an incredible practice on brands. But the most important thing about their practice is that they've put economics against it and the value of brands. So they were able to, A, help us, they gave us more credibility, work with us on the economics of it, and sort of add value to this whole thing. So if we're about the creative insight in the study itself, and you have U.S. News and World Report for the media, for the distribution, and for the content, and then Wharton for the rigor. It's an unbeatable partnership.
The study itself, then, to say it's large is a bit of an understatement, both in terms of the countries that it's looked at in this year. So I think another 20 countries.
Yes.
In 2017 versus 2016, but also the types of people who you've been interviewing.
Right. So when you look at it, let's just talk about in general the types of people. So we talk to business elites, business decision makers, and citizens. Now, why is that important? Because you have to be able to look across the spectrum. So you need elites. You need the people who are in roles of leadership that are critical, the people who are looked to by others. You need decision makers because you want to make sure that you're talking to people who are actually making decisions in business, whether they're big businesses, small businesses. You just want to make sure, and we covered a lot. And then you want general citizens. And so we've balanced for every country that we're in, we're balanced against those 3, and we think that's really important. We talked to 80 countries. The criteria are all based on World Bank and UN data, so we're talking to the top 80 countries in the world, which I think covers some 90% of, literally covers 90% of GNP, of population. It really gives us a huge opportunity to say that this is really, in truth, a global study.
And not only can you look at the aggregated data, but you can also look at the individual country data.
Going down to country by country. Remember, it's perception. So it's perception, how I look at you from the outside, but also how you look at yourself, which is kind of interesting. So I'm able to do both.
But as we know from the classic brand world, perception is very much reality, isn't it?
Oh, totally. And getting worse.
Now, in order to get to a single metric, because at the end of the day, although you can look at the data by country, you can also aggregate it to have a look at what is the best country. How have you defined what best is in those terms?
So best is looked at in lots of different ways. So we have best for adventure. We have best for millennial to start a job in. I mean, you can't imagine the number of ways we can cut this data. And by the way, the amount of content that we create from cutting this. But we've looked at best in terms of what we call soft power. Now, why soft power? What became very clear to us is that for the longest time, the world was looked at from what we call tanks and banks. You had more tanks, you had more banks, you were the most powerful guy. You know, power grows out of the barrel of a gun philosophy. Now, that worked during the Cold War for sure, for some of the years after it. Now, it's exactly the opposite. Tanks and banks represent maybe 8% of the power grid. Maybe. Which is kind of interesting. So that's no longer, it's no longer from a perceptual point of view of what makes me think you're a powerful country. So things that are more important are entrepreneurship, quality of life, citizenship, open for business, cultural influence, adventure, heritage. These are the things that people look at. And when you have the right aggregation of all of these things, then people perceive you as being powerful. If you're open for business, it means that it's easy to do business in your country. Well, that's pretty powerful.
But it's interesting that open for business as a dimension is so critically important. Just the notion of trade, business, you know, in a world where maybe many people now looking inwards as opposed to looking outwards.
They are, but other people are looking inwards to them. So what's so interesting is, and I'm glad you brought that up, so if you look at Brexit, we thought the UK would drop precipitously in the ranking. Now, the US did, by the way, and we did this after the elections. The US dropped 3 points or four spaces, not 3 spaces in the ranking versus last year. And it's very clear why. UK stayed the same. And when we looked at the data, what occurred to us was that from a perceptual point of view, Brexit was very much an inward-looking thing. So if you're not living in the UK and you're just somebody who visits every once in a while, well, what do you know, right? So if you've gone to the UK and then you go to Paris, like what's the first thing you know? You have to change your currency because they're not using the euro anyways in the UK. Oh, that's kind of interesting. So you're looking at it from the outside, you're looking and you're saying, what the hell, nothing's changed. Like these guys weren't part of the EU anyways. And I'm still doing business there. It's still an important country to me. Nobody's told me I can't do business there. They're not making it harder. So all of a sudden, this soft power becomes very powerful. And you realize, hey, these guys are open for business. They always have been. They're not going away. So I think that those kinds of, one of the other things that we discovered, by the way, that stability, and you'll see when you see the rankings, stability became hugely important. People want to see stability. They want countries that might seem boring. So the Scandinavian countries all moved up, but they're stable. People want to see stability. You know, France scares everybody.
Well, I suppose in a turbulent world, stability is
Stability is a great thing,
yeah.
right? So, you know, you look at France and you get a little nervous. You see an election where everybody has, you know, between 19 and 23% of the vote, and you say to yourself, well, let's be really clear. At the end of the day, nobody really won. So you can say you won, but everybody's still within a couple of points of each other. And then when you start aggregating right and left and middle and center, like, where the hell are you? You have no idea.
So given that the data we've got, what are the two sort of strands about how this data could be used?
So I think the first...
In a practical way.
Yeah, so I think in the most practical way, the first is a tool for governments. Now, what's interesting about governments, and this is to all our people out there who should be thinking about this, there's so many different aspects to government. So you've got tourism. You have economic development. You have quality of life. So you have social programs that are being done. You have outward PR. You have all these different things. You have just brand. Every country today has a brand practice. Like if you don't think your country does, trust me, they do. Everyone does. Now, this is the best tool that'll ever exist for it. And I've presented this to a number of presidents, prime ministers, no kings yet, or queens. But it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see how they behave when they see it, like how it turns them on. You know, when we presented this the first time, and within minutes, Angela Merkel is tweeting, and Justin Trudeau is tweeting, it's pretty powerful stuff. So our view is that from a government point of view, there's a tremendous amount of data here. So for example, if you're a country where millennials do very well in terms of, again, from a perceptual point on the outside, that this is a place where people outside are saying, millennials love coming here to start their careers. Well, that's a huge piece of data for you. And your ability to use that data to shape what you do is fabulous. So that's one. So that's sort of obvious. The less obvious, but yet equally important, are brands themselves. And that gets back to what we talked about before. So if your brand is very powerful in a country, whether it's a brand that you export or even an internal brand, that tells you a lot. And like, how connected are you to the country? How similar are you to the country? If your country doesn't do well abroad, but you want your brand to do better, what might you learn? What might you learn from where your country is lacking that you can build into your brand and make that more powerful for you? If you want to import or export to, import, whichever, it depends, I guess, which side of the fence you sit on. But if you want to start selling your goods to another country, understanding that country and understanding your goods, your brand, understanding your country, like, what does that do for me? How can I leverage that in incredible ways that makes everything that I do that much more powerful?
Well, we're going to delve a little bit more deeper in the rest of this program into some of the findings from the 2017 study. But for the moment, David Sable, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
And now,
it's always good to see you.
Great. And now is a really good time to take a look at the 20 best countries for 2017. Well, I'm now joined by Bill Holliber, who is the President and CEO of US News and World Report, the partner in the 2016 and also 17 study. Bill's also the President and CEO of New York Daily News. Bill, thanks very much indeed for joining us. We heard a little bit earlier David Sable's story about how the two of you got together to concoct this study. Let's hear it from your side.
Well, I know David is a great storyteller, but I'll just pretty much make it simple, is that when David comes calling, and he's irresistible. And I think very quickly we established a common sense of priorities, that we wanted to measure the world, and we wanted to leverage what we know best about our brands. And it became a very easy opportunity for us to say, you know what, there's something here that we can do for citizens around the world, and by measuring the value of countries and the value of country brands. And I think, David's a great person to work with. And
it is difficult to say no to him, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So.
For those watching maybe outside the States who don't know too much about US News, tell us a little bit about the organization.
So US News, is an 80-year-old brand, legacy media company that went all digital about 7 years ago. We transformed the business into focusing on data, using a lot of data and rankings, and storytelling and journalism, with the main goal that we attract people that are coming to our site with intent, so they end up having some sort of positive outcome. We cut across 7 different areas of business. We're in the healthcare business, we're in the education business. People know us for the best colleges, ranking hospitals. We're in the travel business, we rank destinations, we rank hotels, et cetera. We're in the financial business. We have a very robust website that ranks ETFs and mutual funds and so on. We are in the car business. We're in the real estate business, where we connect buyers and sellers with real estate agents in our Best Places platform. And then we're in the news and public policy business, where we had introduced the same concept of using data and storytelling journalism. And it was David's idea and effort to get together that helped create that catalyst of opportunity.
But that whole sort of notion, in a sense of journalism plus data, sort of gives you something more than the sum of the two parts.
Yeah, measuring things is a lot of fun, okay? Making that information and that data exposed and transparent creates a lot of competition. And what we want to do is try to create that competition amongst country leaders, in this particular case, like what we've done in the healthcare field or in the education field. And then the storytelling, focusing on the issues, using the data to sort of help tell those stories, creates a dialogue, a debate. It gets informed citizens, policymakers, business decision makers saying, why can't we do something like what's going on in Germany versus something that maybe is going on in Hungary or something like that. So there's opportunities there to sort of dissect that information and think about how they might be able to improve the quality of life and really advance society as we know it.
So apart from, in a sense, the rankings, which are interesting to have a look at and debate why this, why that, you do see the opportunity of policy being changed, of people's lives getting better, as a result of this study.
Yeah, we think over time. This is the second year of Best Countries. We think over time, we're not going to go away. In some cases, they wish we would go away. That the benchmarking and progress, you'll start to see progress. Even in just the 1 year, this is the second year we did it, we saw significant shifts. Okay, a lot of it based on what happened with the election, but they're meaningful enough to say, we got to take notice to that. We were able to discover really what the key issues are around the world, where a lot of people, I would say, got organized behind, and those are the soft power issues, which we'll talk about. But the benchmarking year after year, and after several years, it will start to take an effect, because leaders of countries are going to get asked questions. They're going to want to know. We know that when we had our event down in D.C. In March with ambassadors from around the world, it created a lot of debate and interest in what we're doing, and bringing ideas back of why one country is able to move in a particular direction. When we're looking at 9 different subcategories with over 1 trillion different data points, all accessible to be able to search and analyze, it makes for a powerful medium to influence change.
Well, let's take a look at some of the observations that we've seen from the 2017 study. Let's talk a little bit, I suppose, about some of the very sort of high-level observations that you've been able to make.
Yeah, so we do storytelling. We work with expert journalists that are in about 80 countries around the world, in regions that really understand that culture. We try to stay topical, so we create 25, 30 stories a day. Some of it's just pure data journalism, where we will look at different rankings, like best place to raise a child, best place to be a woman.
So the site isn't static in a sense. In that respect, the content is constantly changing.
It is
to what's going on in the world.
Yeah, it is, and where we'll take a look at leading into this year, we did a lot of editorial on populism and what that really means, what the reaction is around the world to the current president that's there, which was a big part of it. The issue that came out of the data, this yearning for stability and sort of leaning in on Japan being in that area. So it's sort of a selection, and it goes on daily, which is why you have to have good editors that can understand what's most important. We just did a wonderful story about Venezuela, and we know what's going on there, and we were able to track that back to the data that we have, so that it gives it sort of girth to it.
Well, there's no shortage of things going around the world that can have some.
No, we hope, we want to be
influence and
part of the
impact.
conversation. We want to stimulate debate, but we also want to say there's data here that can point you in a direction that there is a pathway to improvement.
Okay, so let's look at some of that data. The number 3 country was the UK. Given what's been going on in the UK, I suppose one would have thought they would have, or we in the UK would have declined this year as opposed to stayed static.
Right. So I
What's
guess
the story here?
The story there. So stability. So even though no one expected that, we expected that to change. They were number 3. Great Britain was number 3 in 2016. And number 3, I think we really saw the direction of the leadership at the UK, that there wasn't a lot of hyperbole. It was sort of like slow and steady. We're going to work it out. We're going to move slowly. And I think there was less concern. And what we see emerging is concern. And I think there's a referendum that is about ready to happen with the snap election to get the confirmation, that sense that the country is behind me, which is understandable. But I think there is a quiet concern that's probably bubbling up, that what's actually going to happen when we actually implement this. So, but I think it really had to do with the way UK was projected around the world, and they showed stability. They show that we have everything under
And
control.
that's sort of an interesting theme that you see throughout the data, actually. In a world that is more volatile, where you don't really understand what is happening, how it's happening, why it's happening, a lot of change, a lot of things being spoken about, that actually stability is actually seen as a positive as opposed to a negative.
Yeah, I think with everything going around the world, I think, obviously when you talk about the United States and their influence around the globe, when people feel unstable, they get really concerned and they sort of withdraw. And
let's look at
Yeah.
the US. So we see a decline to number 7 position in the US.
Yeah, and that's a big decline.
Yeah.
I mean, we were number 4, number 7. In numbers, it's not a lot percentage; it's significant, right? And the underlining information in that is really, really interesting. So we did this study. We held a study. We did it right after the election. So this was done right after the election, before
So before the inauguration, but
before
after
the
the results, yeah.
inauguration. And we're the 89% of the world was very focused on this election. Okay, and so what goes on here is going to have a lot of impact. Where we were really affected in our ranking really had to do in the soft power issue, citizenship, which is openness, immigration. Okay, it was an issue. Our tourism numbers have dropped, and we're seeing that a lot of people are less interested in coming to visit the United States around the globe. Open for business. They see sort of a retraction in some of these areas. And this is all perception. So these are the messages that were sent, and people are saying, we're going to pull back, we're concerned, what's going to happen here? This is really unstable, and we don't think as highly of the United States as we once thought. So that's what you see coming through. And we'll see how that works itself out in the future. Right now, there are a lot of mixed messages going on, but again, it'll come down to the actions that are created. But it's a grave concern.
Well, Japan, interesting. Again, maybe a stability story as well.
Yeah, I think with the data set there, they jumped up a couple spots, and Stable is good.
Yeah, so Japan number 5.
Japan,
Zero growth for all these years, but maybe that's not just a bad thing.
It's all the unexpected stuff that you want, right? You want everything to be sort of solid and not shifting around, slow and steady. But they have some really good things going on there. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, very strong. Open for business. It's a great place to start a business. In fact, all of Asia is very popular in that area. Countries that look to Japan as if people that the Middle Eastern region looks to Japan as something that they admire, and you think about the contrast of that, Middle East, incredible instability, and they look to Japan as a country that they look towards a stability, which is something that they're yearning for. And these are the sort of things that we hope people look at, and they dig into the data, and they want to understand why, and they say, well, how can we actually get to that? Well, there's some difficult issues in the Middle East versus Japan, but it's something that to be admired, and stability could be the thing that could be the most important aspect of how elections occur around the world as well.
Now, if you take a sort of historical look, power was all about, I suppose, your military power and maybe your financial muscle. That's changing, isn't it?
Yeah, so if you look at power, this is about military muscle, right? This is about who has the bigger military budget than anybody else. But it also has to do with political leadership, not just in one's country, but around the world. It has to do with engaging, when to engage around the world. So it's not just military power. And this is where the U.S. still comes out number 1, okay, because and it's a very important issue for people around the globe, that New York is that superpower, and they're talking a lot of it has to do about military power, keeping the world safe. But Russia, which is 2 and has always been 2, is now only a 1/10 of a percentage point behind the United States in terms of power. So for obvious reasons, there's been a lot of effort that Russia has done about what they've done in Syria, their aggressiveness with Ukraine, their involvement with Iran and North Korea, and we all know that. And I think maybe the influence that Putin had on the election certainly came out. I mean, that's part of power. It's political leadership and influence. But if you look at the interest level, the Middle Eastern countries look at Russia as the number 1 superpower. It used to be the United States. So there's been some shifts already occurring. And I think, we're in a delicate situation that perception, where does it end up leading to? And will that be of concern? How will the public shift and address that? Will there be a reaction to Russia continuing to gain power, even if it's perception right now? Certainly economically, there's still a ways to go. But that really has us, that I would be very concerned about that.
The study has had phenomenal reach, both in terms of its social reach and its reach on the website. Give us a sense both of the numbers and the scale of this.
So, much more than we ever expected. We've had 6.5 million people engaged with the site. Half of the people that engage are outside the United States, so it's phenomenal from that standpoint. The evaluation of who the audiences are, we work with BAV on that in terms of the polling and things. Very heavy business decision maker, policy makers around the world, and thought leader, informed citizens. So we're attracting the right people. And the good thing about that is that as you start to inform them, educate them, get them engaged, the hope is that they're going to take what they learn and they start to use it and apply it. And I think we're beginning to see evidence of that. We certainly have been asked as a company to engage with a lot of the ambassador diplomats down in DC at different countries. I know the same for BAV and Y&R. There's a lot more engagement that's going on and interest in trying to solve these complicated issues. And they realize that, the brand is really critical because you have to get the citizens of those countries behind what that mission and that vision is. And I think that's what we hope to create with all this.
Tremendous. Well, I can't let you go, Bill, without asking you one sort of final question on a more sort of macro level, because we've just had the US election. The results are being played out. We're sort of entering into the sort of the journalistic 100-day period for the Donald Trump administration. We're just about to enter into an election both in France, in a snap election in the UK and in Germany. How important are those European elections in a sort of an American sort of context?
Well, we saw what happened in the first phase of the French election. The stock market reacted in a positive way because they think now Le Pen's not going to make it in, and so on. But we'll see, because polls are very unusual these days. This is from probably what we all read and engage with. The data that we see from our study is the soft power issues in Europe, including the Scandinavian countries, is extremely strong. So citizenship, openness, diversity, environment, all those cultural issues are very, very important in Europe. And I don't think that's going to change. I think, we think that stability will reign there, because I think we'll have to wait and see what happens with UK when they actually complete their exit from the European Union and the impact of that. And I think that probably won't change things much. I also think there's the ultimate fear of engaging with Russia and the concern of Europeans and having Russia getting too powerful. And that would probably come up in the elections. It'll surface up pretty aggressively as we get closer to the vote. Europeans and Russians have an issue with each other, as we all know. But I think stability will reign. And I think after UK leaves the European Union, Brexit is implemented, then we have to see how things sort of settle in. And then see what the United States actually does. What legislation is passed, how we actually engage with trade, how we work with law and order around the world. I think that'll be the test. And if we get back to the way we normally react around the world, I think things will settle down.
Well, one last question before I let you go. The 2017 study, you poured all over it. What was the thing that most surprised you?
I would say on every category in the different groups of the subcategories and non-subcategories is the amazing work that the Scandinavian countries do to quality of life. And I think that looking at the future leaders of the world, of citizens, which are the millennials, who are so attracted to that, what's going to happen, 10 years from now when they are in positions of power and influence, which is not that long from now? Will those same things carry through, and will that continue to grow and develop, and what the world will look like?
Well, we look forward to looking at the best studies in 2027 then.
Yeah.
Bill,
yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much. All right, great.
Well, I'm here now with Anna Blender, who is a Senior Vice President here at BAV Consulting. Anna, thank you very much indeed for joining us. You really are the person who's been delving into the detail and doing all the analysis of the data, so it's very good to have you here. Of course, the best countries study is not just about the ranking of the various different countries. There are many usages that we can make across the group of the study. So let's just take a first look at how we can cut and slice the data and how we can do some interesting things with it.
Sounds great. So, yeah, when we first embarked on doing best countries, obviously the partnership with US News is amazing, and they're experts in ranking, but we also wanted to make sure that WPP gets some use out of it. And the data is such a powerful strategic tool. It's a powerful PR tool. There's obviously a lot of application from a government perspective, right? So if you are thinking about a tourism campaign pitch, helping you to understand where's the country that you're pitching sitting today, what are some of the strengths, some of the weaknesses, how does it differ by region, and there's so many different ways to cut the data, be it among international travelers or people that happen to be wealthy jet setters. From a corporate perspective, PR, obviously a big opportunity, thought leadership, helping your clients demonstrate an understanding of what's happening in the world, and also market entry strategies. Really interesting tool.
And also just the whole notion of, I suppose, WPP horizontality, and actually how the data can be useful for a whole gamut of disciplines that we have in the group.
Yeah, so we have been inserted as strategic pieces into pitches. We can inform creative positioning, and there have been a lot of different types of teams of all sorts that have formed, everything from initial pitch stage, through strategy, through creative, and all the way through media planning.
And we'll talk in a minute about how people can get in contact with you if they've got some specific issues, and also where on the site they need to go in order to start to pull off some of that data. You've also done some interesting things as an example of how you can use this data for great PR impact. Talk to us a little bit about the American elections, and if countries could have voted for the American elections, what they would have voted.
Yeah, so this was a fascinating one, and we got a lot of traction from the PR perspective. And we did, in our survey, have an opportunity. The survey was done, we started November 14th, right after the US election. We had the opportunity to ask people, if you were an American citizen eligible to vote and lived in the US, who would you have voted for? And it was interesting. Overwhelmingly, Hillary did win the global election, so 60% voted for Hillary.
Well, but a shame it wasn't a global election then for Hillary.
But what was really interesting was kind of getting down into the individual countries. So no surprise to us, 79% of Mexico would have voted for Hillary. And at the complete other end of the spectrum, 83% of another country would have voted for Trump, and that was Russia. So it created a very interesting dialogue.
Maybe they did.
Maybe they did. We don't know. At some point we'll find out. But the interesting thing is the other country that voted very heavily for Trump was China at 64%. So it's just very interesting to see, how global sentiment emerges with this election data. And we've done some additional analysis if anybody's interested about what it really means and kind of what it means for where the world is going.
But it's interesting sort of example of how you can pinpoint elements of that data, extract it, and then use it as a platform for both sort of PR activity and also for thought leadership pieces that you can do across the group and across the world.
Exactly.
The cultural flip, that's been an interesting one.
Yeah, and this was actually another interesting PR opportunity. Italy beat out France as the #1 most culturally influential country this year. But the implications that it has for Italian companies are quite broad, right? So Italy now has the platform of the world theoretically, and we actually do quite a bit of work with chambers of commerce, for example, helping their members understand how could they take their Italianness or their Frenchness or their Germanness or their Chinese elements and really use that in promoting their brand and driving their brand forward.
Because of course, that's a double-edged sword in a sense, isn't it? Because there's certain values and attributes, as we see from this, that the country gives you. But there's some negatives associated with some of those as well. So it's a question of how do you play those particular levers?
Exactly, and it's about understanding what it is that your brand really needs, right? What are the key drivers in your category, and what are your own strengths, things that you can pull from, but then also your weaknesses. And a lot of times those weaknesses you can actually borrow from the country brand.
Okay, so let's take a look at some of the work that you've been doing in Italy as a sort of a mini case history then.
Yeah, well, so this is actually an interesting one. We consulted with a group of members from the Italy-America Chamber of Commerce, and we created what we call the brand provenance matrix for them. And this is something that anybody can really do, and it could be customized by country and by market, but we pulled out the things that Italy is really strong in, and also that are important for brands across all kinds of categories. And we told them, put together a matrix. Where is your brand really strong? Where is it weaker? And then plot it versus where Italy is really strong and weak. And what we figured out, this is an example of a brand that was not very charming, authentic, or trendy, and not really worth paying more for, according to the owner. But these are things that Italy is very, very strong in. And so speaking about Italy promotes that image of the brand.
Okay, regional cuts, also at a very high level. When you look at the data, you can play by country as well, but looking at just regionally, what do we see? What are the really interesting observations?
Well, so a lot of times, perceptions are really different by region. What we have here is an example of what's considered, the most fashionable country across the 4 different regions. So you see the top 10, and, if you are a French or Italian brand, a fashion brand looking to expand globally, you probably will not have any issues anywhere because you just tend to be known as very fashionable. Interestingly enough, you see that UAE appears both on the European and the Americas list, but not in the Middle East and Africa, right? So what does that mean? Are fashion brands from the UAE, do they actually have a better opportunity going abroad to Europe or the Americas? Okay,
and tourism, I suppose, is obviously a big focus of where the data can be used, but tourism has sort of a much wider meaning than just people going off and sitting on a beach for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
What do you find from the data when you look at tourism?
Tourism is such a, it's very diverse. Are you talking about business tourism? And if that's the case, do you want to attract temporary workers? Do you want to attract large business conferences that are going to bring in other visitors as well? Do you want to be a place where people really want to go and study abroad? And different countries have different strengths that can build up to either one or the other. So what our data can help you do is figure out strategically what should the priorities be, where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses. So for example, everything from best place to invest in, best places to retire, to study abroad, and best places to have adventures alone are all ways that we can kind of bring it to life.
Every presentation needs to have a complicated chart, so I suppose this is the complicated chart here. What does it tell us?
Well, this is comparing how modern a country is perceived to be to how affordable, right? So you see this kind of negative line, everything's going downhill, and what that really means is the more modern you are as a country, the more you tend to be expensive, right? But if you're a traveler looking for interesting opportunities or a country looking to promote itself in some way, if you happen to be quite modern but also affordable, that's an opportunity. So you see on here, China, Malaysia, those are 2 examples of countries that happen to have that. We see Iran all the way in the bottom left, which is neither modern nor affordable, so they need to work on that, I guess. Interesting place to be.
That's probably the least of their problems, but...
Yeah, it's probably not the priority right now, but...
This, I suppose, as complex as it is when you first look at it, is just one of the ways that you can start to interrogate the data, create your own sort of dimensions, create your own hypothesis, and start to make some very interesting observations for clients and potential new business pitches.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so social change, a lot's been talked about as to how social change is both important but also happening around us. Some countries are leading that, some countries are desperately lagging behind. What do you find?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and I think a lot of companies even are trying to understand, do we talk about social issues or do we not? And where you come from, for example, if you're a Swedish country, which in our data it's the #1 country brand for women, you can actually talk about that, what you've done to promote human rights and women's rights. And there are lots of ways to cut at the data to see, where, in terms of your country of origin or wherever it is that you want to be, what are the values that you really need to be aware of? What are the values that you can actually espouse believably? That's something to really understand in terms of the landscape. Or if you want to bring change to your country, what are the countries that really either need change or where perceptions and reality just don't align?
Okay, so one of the key elements of any country is its commercial ability, its ability to generate money, its ability to provide employment, and also to attract businesses from around the world. Some of the countries are seen to be a fantastic place to do business, and some of them aren't. What does the data show?
Yeah, so what's really interesting is, we have a few different rankings. This one is best countries to start a business, and most of the top countries are Asia, right? So if you're an Asian country, it's very easy to promote yourself, use the rankings. Interestingly, we still have the United States and Canada in the top 10. So that's something that governments can own and say, you know what, there are opportunities there, but also...
But it's interesting in that in this table, the United States and Canada is probably the only, I suppose, established, maybe we call them slow-growing markets now.
Yeah.
The rest are all sort of more tigerish economies.
It's interesting. I mean, it could be just like we saw business leaders seeing some opportunity in the UK. Maybe this change does tell some people that maybe there are some new and interesting opportunities in the US, whether those are internal or external. Not sure, but with Canada, it's a very open place. It's demonstrated that, so maybe it's a place where people from all over the world feel like they could start a business.
Okay, we've talked general. Now it's time to get really specific. So Anna, let's take a look at our Asia Pacific APAC region. First of all, which countries in the study is defined as APAC?
So we didn't define anything for the respondents. So it's kind of up to us to choose, but really we're going from, the Azerbaijan and the Kazakhstan through to Pakistan and India, all the way to Australia and New Zealand.
Including China, so it's quite a...
Includes China.
It's quite a mix of economic strength, size, and the way in which some of those countries are fundamentally changing.
Yeah.
Looking at the very top level, what APAC countries do best?
Well, so the countries that are strongest, Japan and Australia, right? So Japan being the number 5 country. And other than that, there's a little bit of a shift down, but you've got Singapore that's up there, you've got New Zealand, and China tops out the number 20. Then after that, South Korea. And towards the bottom, you've got Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan still trying to make it, and Pakistan also has some work to do.
And in terms of some of the dynamics, we see that China is the second for a country that's great to do business in.
Yeah, so China is actually number 2 behind Thailand. What it really says is people are still seeing a lot of opportunity in China, right? A lot of untapped potential, and Asia in general. That's really what Asia stands for when you think about one of the key takeaways of the region. So places to invest in, you've got Malaysia, Singapore, and India as number 1, 2, and 6. And then countries to start a business, like you said, Thailand, China, but also Malaysia, all the way down to Vietnam at number 9. So if you're an Asian country, this is an opportunity to go and reach out, because chances are somebody's thinking about you as a place to do business in.
Well, this really has just scratched the surface on all of the data, and especially the regional data. There's loads more data analysis that everybody watching and across the WPP group can get access to. So can you just tell everybody where do they go to in order to get to the website? Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the data is available on the US News site, and that's usnews.com/news/best countries. I think you'll probably email that out to people if they want.
And magically it will appear on the screen about now.
Yes. And they can also email me. So I think that my email is also on the screen right about now. So feel free to email me. We have a nice team that can pull together some interesting insights for you for a pitch, and then we can figure out how hopefully we can work together to bring best countries and some of the insights to the region and elsewhere.
Well, Anna, thank you very much indeed. And that draws to a close today's special web broadcast all about the 2017 Best Countries Study for WPP. My name's David Roth, and it's been my pleasure to host today's web session for you. I'd like to thank all of my guests for participating. Please don't forget to contact Anna if you need any further information. And if you want to have a look at the data, which we strongly urge you do, please visit the US News website, which URL is on your screen. Well, from me, from the studio here, thank you very much indeed for watching.